Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the pre-dawn hours of an actual Victorian household. Not the kind behind velvet ropes at historic sites, but the lived-in kind. You're coming awake in your cramped, frigid bedroom, pale grey daylight seeping through. Ice crystals have formed on the windowpane's interior, and downstairs you catch the sound of the housemaids stoking the hearths. But before you even consider heading down there, something has to happen first. You need to dress yourself, which means dealing with the corset. By now you've worn this garment so many times it feels like part of your skeleton. It doesn't simply cinch your middle, it commands your entire torso. Your breathing changes, your shoulders draw backward, your pelvis tilts slightly forward. This isn't ornamental, it's the foundation of your shape, your bearing, your whole appearance before society. And getting it on takes effort. You remain motionless while your sister, or perhaps your lady's maid, if fortune favours you, begins at the lower edge and progresses upward, pulling the cords with steady, short yanks. There's a cadence to the process, and an understood quiet. You try not to flinch. Nobody speaks while this happens, but something might surprise you. The corset serves more than aesthetic purposes. It's about control. Not just physical control, but behavioural. Once you're fastened tight, your movements shift. You can't hunch forward, it's physically impossible. Your gait becomes more upright, more measured. Your appetite shrinks too. Not by choice, but because there's limited space for digestion. That's why countless women develop the refined practice of picking at food rather than eating normally. Dining becomes a performance of tiny portions and careful swallows, not solely because of manners, but because a restrictive corset makes stomach upset almost guaranteed. It's not entirely rigid though. Certain corsets offer surprising give, constructed with cording or even elastic inserts if your budget allows such modern innovations. Others rely strictly on whalebone and steel construction. And yes, there exists something marketed as the health corset, promoted as a gentler option, though it still compresses in ways you'd prefer not to discuss. Your mind wanders to your aunt, who loved boasting about sleeping corseted every single night for 10 years, determined to preserve her figure. You recall tales of young women fainting in chapel or requiring revival salts after vigorous dancing, almost invariably because they'd tightened their lacings excessively, attempting to mirror the illustrations in Godey's Lady's Book. You wouldn't describe it as pleasant, but strangely the corset feels protective. You're not genuinely prepared to meet the world until you're secured and fastened. That constriction around your chest acts like a silent instruction. Compose yourself. Maintain posture and don't occupy excessive space. There's a peculiar closeness in the daily ritual. The sensation of fingers against your spine, the reflection showing you simultaneously diminished and fortified. And occasionally, just occasionally, when privacy allows, you ease the lacings a fraction. Not conspicuously, but just enough to draw a complete breath. And breathe you do, shallow yet refined as you prepare for the next garment. Because the corset represents merely the starting point. You're nowhere near fully clothed, not by Victorian expectations. The corset might anchor everything, but now you begin adding layers above and below. Next comes the corset cover, a simple cotton piece designed to shield your dresses from the metal clasps and rigid boning beneath. Its function isn't extravagant. It prevents perspiration marks from damaging your bodice. Hygiene becomes theatre, even when it's manufactured. But here's what most people miss: corsets weren't exclusive to wealthy women parading through fashionable districts. Domestic workers, mill labourers, and even expectant mothers wore them as well. Modified according to social standing and situation, your corset could be fashioned from elegant brocade with intricate lace edging, or it could be rough canvas, stained and mended with one fractured bone that pokes your ribcage each time you stoop. Regardless, it's mandatory. Even small girls weren't exempt. Mothers began fitting daughters into light stays as early as age 5 or 6. By 12, the proper version replaced them. It marked a transition, No corset meant no adulthood. And while certain medical professionals of the era voiced concerns, warning of constricted breathing, shifted internal organs and loss of consciousness, social expectations spoke more forcefully. You wouldn't appear at services without one, would you? Let's consider the morning sequence that preceded even wearing it. Before dressing, you bathed, though not thoroughly. Full immersion baths were infrequent and laborious. Instead, you probably managed a standing wash, frigid water in a bowl, a washcloth, a brief moment of shocking cold, then forward to the corset worn over drawers, shift and underskirts. All of this before the morning meal. While dressing, you remember how corsets created impressions, sometimes lasting grooves and depressions along your spine. Certain women formed tough skin, others formed satisfaction. There were even corset contests measuring who achieved the tiniest waist. Documented with ribbons or fingers circling completely around the midsection, Victorian fashion drawings weren't pure imagination. They were targets. And you check the mirror once more. Your waist appears exquisite, dramatically curved, hourglass-shaped, but you understand better than to think it happened painlessly. You've caught rumours of women undergoing rib removal procedures, though nobody in your acquaintance has actually verified it. Still, it makes you think. Eventually. Today you'll slacken the laces following afternoon tea if nobody's observing. Perhaps even remove the corset completely before dinner and wrap yourself in a flowing house gown. But not now. Not while morning is fresh, the curtains are drawn back, and your appearance carries weight. The corset functions as both confinement and creation. It keeps you contained, but it also shapes the identity others anticipate seeing. As you secure your outer dress over it, running your gloved palms across the material, you ready yourself not merely to exit your chamber, but to enter a society that evaluates primarily by outline, secondarily by conduct, and seldom by authenticity. One final adjustment at the waistline, a backward glance over your shoulder, and you proceed into the sitting room, erect, controlled, flawless. You lean closer to the vanity glass, morning brightness highlighting the delicate luminescence of your complexion. Or more accurately, what you want to seem like your complexion. Because this morning your actual skin tone is nobody's concern except yours. And the small container in your grasp contains the answer. The ointment inside carries a faint scent of lavender, mixed with something acrid beneath. You dip your fingertips into its cool, powdery consistency and start spreading it across your face. Your hands already understand the routine. Upper cheeks, brow, nose bridge, then down towards the collarbone. You skip the eye area, not because it's dangerous, but because it burns worse. There. This preparation promises to render you luminous, paler, gentler, more refined. You might not identify every component, hardly anyone does, but the outcome proves itself. A spectre. Fair skin represents the mark of sophistication. Bronzed skin suggests outdoor work, and you're certainly no labourer. You pause before your image, it's functioning. You're not radiating, but you are disappearing, which is precisely the intention in this era before modern makeup. This serves as your protection, and like the corset, it conceals more than it displays. Now, you prefer not to examine too closely what's inside it, but occasionally the packaging mentions arsenite of copper. That's arsenic, in case that wasn't clear. Combined with vinegar, chalk and bismuth, it produces your desired ghostly appearance. Women discuss it as they discuss climate, matter-of-factly, with slight grumbling but complete acceptance. You've even encountered soaps containing arsenic, marketed with phrases like cleanses and enhances in ladies' periodicals. And yet you've also caught the whispered warnings. Inflammation that persists, sores that refuse healing, thinning hair at the hairline. One relative's acquaintance had to abandon a facial treatment because her skin shed like fruit rind. But she certainly looked ethereal. At that ceremony, you apply some rice powder to complete the effect. It removes the gloss and sets everything firmly. The tin is gorgeously decorated, a present from an acquaintance, and tucked inside is a powder puff, delicate as dandelion fluff. You tap your cheekbones lightly. A small white haze rises, then descends. Your mouth stays natural. Colour is reserved for stage performers and exclusively after dark. Certain women, typically in literature, are portrayed as possessing effortless beauty, but you realise that even those exceptional specimens usually keep a supply of arsenic tablets hidden in their bedroom furniture. They arrive packaged like confections, miniature pills consumed daily, intended to clarify the skin. They claim it brightens your eyes as well, as if something internal is shining outward. The tablet fashion is gaining popularity among the more adventurous. You've only sampled one. It had a metallic, soapy flavour, but then again, so did your aunt's broth. It's odd, isn't it, that you're more concerned with freckles than with gradual toxicity. But every woman in your circle would prefer appearing wan and delicate rather than spotted and robust. A sickly tint paradoxically makes you seem well in the societal sense, meaning prosperous. You close the container, tuck it into the compartment beside your gloves and hand mirror, and observe the morning light again, still muted, still forgiving. You're nearly prepared. You take hold of a small vial on the dressing table, formed like a tear and sealed with cork. Within moves a liquid that was once transparent but has yellowed somewhat with age. It's citrus extract, or possibly ammonia, depending on which companion suggested it. You've been applying it beneath your eyes each evening to diminish darkness and prevent lines. Does it deliver results? Uncertain. But doing nothing seems far more troubling. Certain women trust elderflower tonic. Others trust mercury-containing salves, though nobody states so openly. They simply shine a bit too intensely, and their expressions gradually stiffen over the years. There's an implicit agreement among women. You don't inquire about the bottle's contents. You simply inquire, does it deliver results? The face represents only half the challenge. You pick up a pumice stone and scrub gently at your palms and joints. The objective isn't merely smoothness, but to eliminate any indication of coarseness that might imply manual work. You've witnessed ladies bleach their hands with citrus and dairy, sleep in gloves packed with wax and botanicals, and there's the rice powder once more, brushed over the handbags just in case a gentleman presses his lips there. Initial encounters matter, particularly when they involve touch. In solitude, you've noticed yourself examining women with complexions a touch too rosy. You suspect they employ Spanish paper, delicate sheets saturated in crimson that release pigment when moistened and pressed to the face. It's ingenious. Prohibited in certain settings, but ingenious. You've tested it once. It left your mouth stinging and tasting like preserved roses and vinegar. But you certainly looked striking in dim lighting. The reality is, everything you apply for enhancement carries some element of risk, and not solely chemical. If someone observes you applying excessively, you're conceited. Insufficiently, you're neglectful. Use colour and you're dramatic. Omit the powder and you're ordinary. There's no neutral ground, only careful navigation between criticism and demand. You think of that girl who applied belladonna solution to enlarge her pupils. She claimed it rendered her eyes more innocent, more yearning. But she also began having trouble with bright light and tumbled down the garden stairs last season. Some believe it's justified. You're undecided. Then again, every woman you know possesses at least one beauty. Cautionary tale. A relation who scarred her face attempting an unfamiliar treatment. An acquaintance who lost consciousness from an arsenic tablet and required revival with smelling salts. A household neighbour whose eyelashes never regenerated after experimenting with a copper solution. You face the mirror now and observe someone who appears impeccable. Pallid, composed, refined. But beneath that immaculate surface exists a mixture of chalk, metals, and concealment. You blink and briefly envision yourself stripped of all enhancement. natural-skinned, sun-marked, grinning too broadly. But no, that's not how society functions. With a concluding look and a measured breath, you extend toward your gloves. It's moment to greet the day, and everything about your presentation, from your lace-adorned neckline to the spectral shade of your features, confirms you've executed the morning procedure correctly. Even if your skin prickles slightly more than usual, you arrange your hair backward with intentional precision, fingers discovering the expected texture of pins and padding underneath the arrangement. It appears abundant, lustrous, styled in a twist that would satisfy even your husband's mother. But here's the truth, most of that hair doesn't belong to you. It began gradually, several strands disappearing in the brush each dawn, collected in a small porcelain vessel marked hair savings. Every respectable lady owns one. You'd gather those strands for weeks, sometimes months, until you accumulated sufficient quantity to construct what's affectionately termed a pad. A mass of your own shed hair, compressed tightly and secured beneath your natural growth to create the appearance of thickness. It's not revolting, it's resourceful. Eventually, though, your natural hair couldn't satisfy fashion's demands. That's when you sought the hair merchant. Yes, that's an actual profession. He arrives periodically with a case containing braids, loops and ringlets, organised by shade, valued by length, obtained from women you'll never encounter. Certain hair originates from country girls in rural areas, traded for a few coins or a decorative strip. Other portions originate from more disturbing sources: medical facilities, children's institutions, even the recently departed. But nobody discusses that. The reality rests carefully at your temples as you inspect the false section you're preparing to attach. It's an exact match. Reddish-brown, dense and possessing ideal sheen. You invested extra for that quality. You secure it and fasten it with numerous hairpins, pointed little implements that pierce your scalp if you shift abruptly. But now your profile is finished. From the forward view, it's a refined arrangement. From the rear view, a defying gravity formation. And from any distance, it all resembles natural growth, when actually it's a modest accomplishment of construction. Hair fashion isn't a trivial thing. Trends shift with every decade, every season. Right now, sky-high pompadours and braided coronets are all anyone wants. Last year, it was those Grecian coils. Some women go further, attaching entire transformations, complete caps of fake hair that sit on top of their natural locks. They resemble wigs, but never call them that. Wig sounds theatrical. A proper lady wears a piece. You've witnessed rivalries erupt over hairpieces, whispered accusations of fraud behind folding fans. One woman's bun tumbled off mid-waltz. Another collapsed when a child yanked her bangs. Nothing screams humiliation louder than visible fakery, yet you continue, because natural hair, left alone, rarely measures up. Victorian existence is theatre, and your head serves as the stage. This morning, your maid gently worked through your real hair with a boar bristle brush. She added just a touch of lavender oil, not excessive, or it'll appear greasy, and assisted you in winding everything into the foundation for your hairpiece. You both moved in silence. There's something ritualistic about it, unspoken yet binding. As you secure the final pin and sense the slight heaviness at your crown, you pull your shoulders back. It isn't simply about appearing attractive, it's about appearing composed, controlled, flawless. Because your hair serves as your crown and every strand, even the purchased ones, bears witness. Later that day, you stop before the mirror and spot a single hairpin sliding loose with trained fingers. You push it back into position, understanding that if even one element of your construction fails, the fantasy shatters. That's the reality of Victorian hair. It's never merely hair. It's identity, discipline, and silent rivalry arranged in loops and ringlets. You consider what's concealed inside your dresser drawer, a small container wrapped in gentle fabric. Inside, a switch of genuine human hair, darker than yours. It came from your cousin before she grew sick, before her medical treatment started. She presented it to you with a grin and a quip. At least somebody should benefit from it. You haven't used it yet, but you can't force yourself to discard it either. Then there's the accumulation of combings you've been collecting. Some women purchase their own hair to be transformed into rats and switches, mailed away to a specialised hair worker who cleanses, organises, bundles and sends it back as something grander. It's a peculiar sensation, anticipating your own hair to come back to you in a modified form. You once went to a tea where a lady insisted her braid had been snatched at a community bathhouse. Another declared she contracted lice from a borrowed fringe. The gathering laughed anxiously, but not too enthusiastically. These aren't implausible worries. Hair robbery is genuine, and infestation's even more common. That's why you always expose your pieces to sunlight when nobody's observing. And you powder them, yes, like a wig to maintain their freshness. If you're truly careful, you add several drops of gin to repel pests. You remember the hair promotions from the Illustrated London News, bottles guaranteeing to revive fullness, remove dandruff, even make your curls gleam like mahogany. Mrs. Allen's World Hair Restorer, Rowland's Macassar Oil. You attempted the second once. It smelled like citrus and disappointment and created oil marks on your chair's back. So-called anti-macassars were designed precisely to shield furniture from it. But what truly lingers with you is how everyone behaves, as though this intricate procedure is simple. You're supposed to emerge from your dressing chamber looking peaceful, as if you simply arose like this. As if your hair naturally spirals like a Grecian goddess and never sheds. In damp weather, heaven forbid anyone glimpses the pins, the cushioning, the tiny net that maintains it all secure while you rest. Still, when you enter a room, heads pivot. People observe the contour of your profile, the curve of your bun, the gleam of your fringe. You're noticed. And in this society, to be noticed is to endure. As the day progresses, the heaviness at the rear of your head becomes familiar, reassuring, almost a gentle reminder of the silent effort beneath your refinement. You shift with caution, bow with grace, and when the wind loosens a strand, you smile slightly and restore it. Not because it's messy, but because it's yours. You lean somewhat at the middle and reach under the folds of your skirt, not for decency, not for mischief, but to locate your pocket. No, not the little stitched thing on your dress's side. That would be far too sensible. Your actual pocket is tied independently around your waist, concealed beneath petticoats, bustle and material that whispers like dried leaves in the breeze. It's an odd little creation, this pocket, constructed of linen, occasionally velvet if you're fortunate. Often decorated with your initials or a modest flower. It fastens with a cord, like a miniature apron worn internally. And it's not solitary. Many women wear two, one on either hip. But accessing them, that's a different matter. The gap in your skirt, referred to politely as a pocket slit, is intended to match perfectly with a pocket underneath. That's the concept. In reality, it's like threading a needle blindfolded. You insert your hand through multiple layers of material, searching in the darkness, hoping your fingers don't encounter a dropped pin or an unexpected orange peel. Yes, you. You once abandoned one there. For days it compressed. Your fingers eventually contact the border. Inside are the silent treasures of your day. A thimble, a folded message, 2 peppermint drops stuck together. A morning brooch you don't wish to wear but can't discard. There's also a small coin purse, delicate as fruit skin, holding exactly 6pence, sufficient for an emergency cab or a secret pastry from the bakery on Queen Street. The pocket is a paradox, concealed yet essential, invisible yet always with you. Nobody sees it, nobody inquires about it. But if you were ever discovered without it, you'd feel exposed. It's more personal than your gloves, more private than your shoes. It contains things you'd never display and thoughts you'd prefer kept close. And sometimes, just sometimes, it contains a letter, folded once, then again, pressed between fabric and flesh until the words stamp faintly on your memory. One such letter written in pencil and sealed without a signature, has existed in your pocket for 3 weeks now. You've never recited it aloud, but you've committed every line to memory. The peculiarity of this arrangement becomes apparent when you dress. You must always recall which side your slit occupies, left or right, so you don't discover yourself in public, clumsily digging in the incorrect direction. You once heard a woman laugh so vigorously at her error that her pocket came loose and dropped with a thud onto the cobblestones. Inside, a dead mouse. She was a science student, or so she claimed. And while the world presumes that men transport everything in their coat, you transport your world wrapped in silence between the stitches. The genuine problem with hidden pockets isn't simply reaching them. It's everything they symbolise. You sense the heaviness of yours as you walk, swaying gently against your hip like a secret you bear under lock and key. Because pockets in this period aren't truly yours. They're tolerated, they're temporary, and they are quite literally fastened to you. Unlike men's pockets, which are sewn into their coats, vests and trousers, abundant and permanent, yours exist as a detachable afterthought. A woman's pocket can be removed as easily as her shawl, which is why they're not just functional, they're quietly revolutionary. Your great-aunt once shared that during the Gordon riots in London, a woman transported gunpowder through the streets in her pocket. Another more notorious tale involves a housemaid who transported love letters for 2 gentlemen simultaneously, never discovered because both messages existed side by side in the same hidden compartment. Even now, your neighbour, a widow with keen eyes and keener opinions, transports pamphlets stitched with the words "Votes for Women" folded neatly alongside her embroidery thread. You touch your pocket now through the layers, sensing the outline of its contents without looking. The brooch, the lozenges, the wrinkled letter. There's something soothing in the gentle clutter, like a miniature chamber stitched into your clothing, a space where your agency conceals in plain sight. Sometimes, though, it disappoints you. You've dropped coins down there, never to be recovered. A key once escaped during a garden party, prompting a complete hour of hunting among flower beds. And then there was the occasion your lace handkerchief protruded just far enough to be spotted by an overly curious child. He tugged, believing it was a treasure. You nearly toppled over. Yet, despite the drawbacks, you favour this secret realm. There's a dignity in its invisibility. A woman might be refused the right to vote, to possess property in her own name, to travel freely without a chaperone. But she still transports what matters. Letters, needles, ink, secrets, all folded tightly into a pouch nobody else observes. Some claim the fashion for these tied-on pockets is diminishing. Dresses now are slimmer profiles, narrower. Seamstresses are starting to stitch shallow external pockets instead, pointless little things that accommodate a calling card and nothing beyond. You attempted one. It felt like walking with your hands bound. You glance down now, your skirts flowing as you move. Nobody can determine, but you're transporting more than your day's necessities. You're transporting the weight of small freedoms. And when you change for evening, you'll untie the pocket gently and position it in the drawer. Not because it's insignificant, but because it requires rest too. You'll examine its contents once more, maybe read the letter just one final time, and then fold the flap shut. In the morning, you'll fasten it back on just above your hip bone, where it's always existed, and step once more into the world with a secret swaying at your side. You awaken earlier than typical, stomach somewhat unsettled from last night's boiled cabbage, and slip from bed with care. The chamber is dim and cold. You traverse the wooden floor in wool socks and lift the lid of the chamber pot beneath the dressing table. It's not exactly a dignified moment, but it's a routine one. Victorian bathrooms, as you understand, aren't really bathrooms at all for most women, even those in reasonably nice homes. There's no running water upstairs, no flushing toilet, no tiled floor that sparkles in the light. Just a pitcher, a basin, and that ceramic pot you hope the maid recalls to empty. Now comes the genuine puzzle: cleaning up. You glance around for the small bundle of paper you placed beneath the basin yesterday. It's not toilet paper, that's far too costly and scarce. What you possess instead is a stack of newspaper fragments cut into neat squares. Some are headlines, others obituaries. You attempt not to read them as you utilize them. If you're visiting someone particularly wealthy, you might notice a perforated roll of medicated toilet paper hanging in the water closet, the variety made by the British Perforated Paper Company. It smells faintly of disinfectant and feels somewhat like stiff tissue mixed with regret. Only the wealthiest families maintain it in regular supply. Everyone else manages with whatever's available. In rural homes, and even in working-class parts of London, stories circulate about people using leaves, corn husks, or even wool scraps to tidy up. You once overheard a woman boast that she only ever used pages from a stolen French romance novel. She claimed the paper was soft and the dialogue dreadful. This morning, though, you have old newsprint, and with it comes another hazard: ink. The cheap variety smears easily. You've discovered the hard way not to wear white drawers on days when you're using the Times. Your cousin once emerged from the privy with half a market report transferred to her thigh. Then there's the matter of disposal. You wrap the used squares and drop them into the slop bucket, a heavy tin pail with a lid that clangs just enough to wake the dog. The maid will empty it later into the ash pit. You attempt not to contemplate too hard about where it goes after that. And yet, in spite of the mess and the odour and the fumbling in half-light, you don't complain. Nobody does. This is simply how it's accomplished. You even maintain a little jar of rose-scented vinegar by the windowsill, just in case you need to disguise an unfortunate moment. Some women soak their rags in it before disposal, a trick passed quietly between friends. You tie your robe tighter and light a match to spark the bedside candle. It flickers, catches, and warms your face. The worst of the morning is finished. Well, almost. You sit on the edge of your bed now, wrapped in your dressing gown, the last curl of match smoke disappearing into the rafters. You reach for a comb to tidy your hair, but your thoughts are still fixed on what just occurred, not because it was shocking, but because it was so very ordinary. And yet, if you examine closely, the concept of toilet paper, genuine soft factory-made paper, is beginning to creep into your world. You witnessed it once at a dressmaker's shop. Tucked beside the sink like a luxury item, smooth folded sheets, imported, whispered about like silk stockings or French perfume. But here's the thing, even as toilet paper begins to appear, most homes aren't prepared for it. Indoor plumbing is still inconsistent. Pipes freeze, drainage is unreliable in the city. The upstairs water closets are newfangled and unpredictable. More than once you've heard of someone pulling the chain only for it to backfire. Literally. So women, clever as ever, adapt. You've witnessed your aunt use lace trimmings from a destroyed petticoat. You've witnessed a governess roll up scraps of fabric to reuse, then rinse in vinegar and hang by the stove. Nothing is wasted, not even in the loo. And of course there's the delicate question of what gentlemen do. They pretend they're above it all. But you've observed them too, carefully folding squares from old letters, tearing margins from outdated ledgers, even slipping a servant sixpence to fetch something clean from the chemist's. Privacy is a myth, and shame is distributed unevenly. At your last visit to the countryside, you stayed in a house that kept a wooden box labelled privy paper, inside corn cobs. You nearly fainted. The host insisted it was perfectly sanitary. You didn't request proof. And then, of course, there's the final horror, running out. It's why you maintain your stash under the basin, carefully folded, replaced weekly. It's not elegant, but it's yours. Some women conceal theirs in sewing baskets or glove boxes just in case. As you begin to dress, sliding into your chemise and reaching again for your corset, you think of the future. Maybe someday someone will invent something soft and clean that every woman can afford. Maybe bathrooms will have warm water and buttons and lights. Maybe nobody will have to tear up the birth announcements just to stay tidy. But until then, you fold another square of newspaper and tuck it into your pocket, just in case. Because in the realm of Victorian womanhood, even toilet paper is a struggle. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, adjusting the thick layers of petticoat and flannel drawers clinging to your thighs. Something doesn't feel quite right. You understand what day it is, or rather, what week. You've been dreading it since the twinges started yesterday. And now, without fail, it's arrived, your monthly visitor. Victorian womanhood doesn't prepare you for comfort. It prepares you for silence. So you say nothing. Instead, you reach beneath the washstand, where a small linen pouch holds your monthly supplies. They're rudimentary, reused, and carefully concealed from sight. You draw out a square of soft wool flannel, folded, washed, and folded again. It's part of a larger collection stitched at home. You recall your mother showing you how to hem the edges to prevent fraying. She never uttered the word menstruation, only your time. And even then, in a whisper. You learn to interpret bloodstains like other girls interpret tea leaves, quietly and with some shame. You attach the cloth pad to a belt fastened around your hips. It's crude but functional. The belt is made of twill tape, and the pad hangs from it, secured by safety pins that dig in if you shift too quickly. You've attempted sewing buttons into it, but they come loose. One girl you knew tried wax thread. It melted. There's also the sponge, not the dish kind. The sea sponge, soaked in vinegar and cut to size. Some women swear by it. You attempted it once, and the memory still makes you wince. It was unpredictable. These tools are not discussed openly, yet every woman employs them, and every woman has her tricks. Layering extra petticoats, wearing darker skirts, stuffing lavender sachets into drawers to mask any hint of blood. Some burn their used cloths in the hearth, others boil them in secret at night. You prefer to rinse them in cold water and hang them near the stove, behind other laundry, of course. You recall your cousin fainting at church one summer. Her drawers were soaked through and she hadn't brought a change. Nobody said anything, but the women knew. They always know. The priest, of course, appeared horrified, as if women weren't made of flesh. Your aunt had hissed afterward, "If you work, it's harder." You've heard of shop girls sitting on folded rags for hours, unable to move. Factory women simply endure it. There's no time to change and no privacy to attempt. You once visited a textile mill and saw a girl tear a strip from her apron, knot it between her legs and continue working. You never forgot her face. And so today you tie the belt, pin the cloth, and brace yourself for the hours ahead. You understand how to walk to reduce shifting. You avoid sudden stares. And you sit carefully, folding your skirts just so. You glance at the small bottle of vinegar on the shelf. Some women drink it to delay their flow. Others claim it shortens it. You're not certain, but you've tried both. In this house, vinegar is more than a condiment. It's medicine, cleaner, and monthly ritual. You go about your day with practiced grace, each movement calculated to avoid discomfort, each step carefully measured. But beneath your skirts, the cloth pad begins to shift slightly, and you sense the tug of the safety pin pressing into your side. There's no correcting it now, not unless you excuse yourself, find privacy, and start again. But privacy is a luxury few women possess, especially during this time. And so, like your mother and your grandmother before her, you endure. By mid-afternoon, you're warm, slightly damp, and fully conscious of your body in a way that's neither pleasant nor freeing. You excuse yourself from conversation more than once. Your hands tremble slightly as you pour tea. The men in the room wouldn't know, couldn't imagine that you're bleeding into a piece of cloth tied around your waist while they debate the merits of railroads and rising sugar prices. The worst part? Not the physical discomfort. It's the silence. Menstruation isn't just unspoken, it's erased. You once saw a health manual with an entire section on feminine irregularities written in such vague euphemisms that you weren't even certain what it meant until years later. And doctors? Most won't even look you in the eye if you mention cramps. They prescribe laudanum or bed rest, neither of which help when your maid is out sick and your brother's children are arriving for supper. So, you learn to conceal it. You fold extra cloth in your pocket. You carry a sachet of rose petals or dried lavender. Some women keep a sprig of mint to press against their wrists, just in case the smell begins to betray them. Others rely on sheer willpower and darker gowns. There are rumours whispered in the sewing circle about women who have superior ways. One claims to have imported rubber drawers from France, washable, discreet, and expensive. Another swears by bundles of moss wrapped in linen, changed 3 times daily. And a widow once mentioned the use of cotton wool, soaked in vinegar, tied with ribbon and worn like a secret. You attempted that too, once. Never again. By evening, the fatigue settles in like fog. You sense the ache across your lower back, the weight in your hips, the dull pounding behind your eyes. But the house is not quiet. Supper must be served, faces must be pleasant. You smile, you nod, you laugh at something inane. And all the while you're bleeding silently into cloth that you will boil in a pot tomorrow while nobody is looking. Before bed, you undress slowly. The pad is heavy now, dark and damp, the safety pin rusting slightly at the tip. You drop it into the laundry pail with a soft splash and reach for a fresh square. This one smells faintly of rosemary. You stitched it yourself from a destroyed underskirt last winter. You lie down on the mattress, curl your knees gently and try not to think of anything at all, because you'll repeat it all again tomorrow and the day after that. And nobody, not your brothers, not your doctor, not your priest, will ever know. You've been invited to tea at a friend's home. Nothing too formal but pleasant enough to warrant your best day dress. You pull it from the armoire, admiring the soft folds of the green skirt. It's new. Well, new to you. It came from your aunt's cousin, who wore it twice before declaring it too bold. But you adore the colour. It shimmers like beetle wings in sunlight. Vibrant, deep, utterly alive. What you don't consider at first is what makes it shimmer. You slip it on and fasten the bodice, your corset already firm beneath. The sleeves taper just so. The bustle sits properly. But as you brush a hand down the skirt, a fine green dust comes off on your fingertips. You pause, then shrug. It's probably just fabric dressing. You're mistaken. That glowing green comes from Scheele's green, or perhaps Paris green, a pigment derived from copper arsenite. Arsenic, the same toxic element you've encountered before in face creams, now part of your wardrobe. It was the rage last season. Fashion magazines called it a hue fit for queens. And indeed, Queen Victoria herself reportedly admired the shade, though she may not have worn it. But here's the danger. The dye doesn't stay put. It flakes, it powders, it can be absorbed through the skin. Some seamstresses refuse to handle the fabric without gloves. One London milliner claimed her apprentice developed sores along her arms just from stitching green ribbons day after day. Still, the colour is breathtaking. You feel somewhat bolder, somewhat more seen when you wear it. A friend once said you resemble springtime wrapped in silk. You blushed, despite knowing your springtime was laced with poison. On the omnibus, you sit beside a woman who admires your dress and asks where you purchased it. You smile, but don't answer. It's simpler that way. Meanwhile, the heat of your body begins to stir the fibres of the skirt. You notice a faint metallic tang in the air. It might be your imagination, or not. At tea, you begin to feel somewhat flushed. Not enough to concern anyone, just a subtle warmth behind the eyes. You excuse yourself and step into the drawing room, pretending to admire a painting while pressing your gloved hands to your cheeks. The gloves are stained faint green. You say nothing. That evening you return home and remove the dress. Carefully, you fold it inside out to avoid spreading any more of the pigment and store it in a canvas wrapper. Your hands tingle. You wash them twice with carbolic soap. The green still lingers, but you'll wear it again. Because despite the risk, despite what you've read and what you sense, you can't resist the way it turns heads. In a world where your voice is soft, your space small, and your opinions gently dismissed, a dangerous dress feels like power, even if it bites back. The next morning, as you brush your hair before the mirror, you notice a faint red mark beneath your collarbone. It wasn't there yesterday. You touch it, curious. No pain, just a little patch of irritated skin right where the green fabric rested against your chest. You've heard of this before. They call it arsenic rash, though not in polite company. Some women develop it after a few wearings, others after just one. It appears like a whisper, first as irritation, then as weeping sores. One shop girl you know was forced to leave her position after her arms blistered from a batch of dyed gloves. The manager blamed her delicate constitution. You dab rose water on the spot and tie a ribbon around your neck to conceal it. The dress remains folded in the canvas wrapper, tucked high on a shelf, not out of reach, just waiting. By mid-morning, you're back at your sewing work. Your fingers throb faintly from yesterday's needlework, though you've grown accustomed to the sensation. You're finishing a hem for your neighbour's daughter, a blue day dress adorned with ruffles. Next to you lies a fragment of that notorious green fabric left over from alterations. It still catches the light, still leaves its shimmer on your skin. You pause and bring the scrap to your nose. There's that scent again, metallic and grassy. You wonder what it might be doing to your lungs. The thought drifts away. Fashion always demands a sacrifice, and this one remains unspoken. You've seen ladies turn green, actually green, around their glove edges. You've noticed flowers wilting faster in rooms with arsenic-dyed wallpapers, yet nobody mentions it louder than a whisper. A physician once published a warning in The Lancet about domestic poisoning. But who has the time to read medical journals when there's tea waiting and hems needing completion? Besides, the fabric continues to sell, remains fashionable, still hangs in shop windows trimmed with white lace. It's too lovely to prohibit, and that's precisely the point. Peril masquerading as refinement provides half the excitement. You once heard two gentlemen debating the matter at a dinner gathering. One chuckled and remarked, "Well, if the ladies demand to perish fashionably, who are we to interfere?" The other responded, "Let them wear grey." You dropped soup in his lap. But privately, women do what women have always done. They adjust. Some wear an undershirt with a high collar beneath green bodices. Some line their gloves with silk. A few courageous souls have abandoned the colour completely, though their wardrobes look somewhat duller for it. You glance at your wrapped gown once more. Perhaps you'll reserve it for special events. Perhaps you won't wear it whatsoever. Or perhaps, when nobody's watching, you'll slide it on again and experience that sensation, the confidence, the gleam, the quiet rebellion that comes from wearing something lovely, even if it scorches. And when someone praises it, you'll smile and reply, "Thank you. It's just something I kept around." The streets carry the scent of horses and coal smoke, two odours you've become familiar with, though never fond of. As you venture into the morning air, you instinctively reach for the handkerchief tucked in your sleeve. It's a delicate square of linen edged with lace and touched with rose oil, and it serves more than decoration. You raise it to your nose as ladies do. It appears fragile, refined, but it's performing far more than preserving appearances. It's your protection. Victorian cities assault the senses. The Thames stinks like something living and decomposing, particularly in warmer months. The tanneries release a smell so dense it settles in the back of your throat. Add the odours of unwashed bodies, rotten meat and horse manure heaped on cobblestones, and even the most dignified woman might gag while crossing. That's why you and every woman you know carry scent-soaked handkerchiefs. Not for style, but necessity. Yours is steeped in lavender and bergamot. You refresh it weekly using a small crystal vial purchased at a stall near Fleet Street. The woman who sold it swore it originated from Paris. More likely, Camden. But the fragrance is divine. And when you hold the cloth to your nose, it alters the world surrounding you, if only momentarily. Some ladies favour stronger aromas. Patchouli, attar of roses, even clove. You once encountered a widow who carried a handkerchief drenched in camphor and claimed it prevented her from fainting on the omnibus. You trusted her. The smell practically knocked you backward. And then there are the truly peculiar methods. One woman at your sewing circle insists she tucks a sliced lemon in her reticule and presses it subtly against her nostrils when the air grows thick. Another soaks dried orange peels in gin and carries them in a velvet pouch. She claims it sharpens the mind. But your favourite by far is the woman who stitched a hidden pocket into her petticoat filled with crushed thyme and salt. For train stations, she explained, eyes wide. The urinals, the fishmongers, the men. You created one yourself the very next day. Of course, scent is more than armour. It's social currency. A woman's fragrance announces her before she speaks. Sweet scents suggest youth and purity. Musks hint at mystery, or worse, worldliness. There are perfumes worn only in morning, others only in spring. A lady of taste knows when to wear nothing whatsoever. Today, though, you're not feeling delicate, so you press your handkerchief closer and inhale deeply. Rose and lavender, fresh linen. A slight trace of starch, and beyond it, horse dung, ash, smoke. You take another breath and continue walking. By midday, the sun has warmed the streets, just enough to awaken the city's most pungent mysteries. You pass a butcher shop, and the acidic smell of blood clings to your skirt like an awkward admirer. A boy nearby is emptying a chamber pot into the gutter, its contents splashing dangerously close to your boots. You step aside with silent grace and press the handkerchief to your nose again, firmer this time. The scent is weakening. The rose water is surrendering its battle. You make a mental note to refresh it tonight, perhaps with something more potent, something citrusy. Your friend Eleanor swears by a mixture of vinegar and cloves, like being slapped conscious, she says with a grin. And maybe that's what you require. Something that reminds you you're alive and still somehow pure. Because being a woman in the city means constantly balancing between revulsion and dignity. You've learned to walk with your skirt slightly raised, your gaze lowered but not excessively, always alert for the next olfactory assault. Even the finest neighbourhoods have their shadowy corners, outhouses leaking into alleyways, public fountains contaminated with who knows what. Once, during a visit to Bloomsbury, you passed a lady who'd collapsed on the pavement. The reason? A fishmonger's stall abandoned in the heat. You offered her your handkerchief. She took one breath and immediately fainted again. Yours was too floral, she required mint. Some women carry vinaigrettes, small silver capsules with sponges soaked in vinegar and herbs. You've always desired one. They open like secrets. One breath and the world clarifies. But they're costly. A genuine vinaigrette costs more than your finest shoes. You've adapted naturally. A lace glove sprayed lightly with rose water. A scarf soaked in lavender then dried in the sun. Even a small twist of wax paper filled with mint leaves. Once, in desperation, you crushed a peppermint lozenge between your teeth and simply breathed through that. But nothing quite matches a well-worn handkerchief, laundered and pressed, scented with attention and folded twice before being tucked in a sleeve. It's more than fabric, it's a declaration. I am ready. I am shielded. I may walk through filth, but I will not succumb to it. As you finally arrive home, your head aches slightly from the mixture of smells you've endured. You remove your hat and strip off your gloves. The handkerchief, once white, is now tinted with soot and street dust, but it served you faithfully. You lay it flat beside your wash basin and pour a few drops of lavender oil onto it. You press it with your fingers, fold it again, and slide it back into your sleeve. Tomorrow the city will awaken again, with all its commotion and smells and smoke. But you'll be prepared, and you'll confront it all gracefully, quietly, with a small lace square between your breath and the world. You reach for your reticule before stepping outside, giving it the gentlest tug to verify the clasp. It's a dainty little object, roughly the size of a teacup saucer made of crocheted silk with a braided drawstring and tasseled bottom. From a distance it appears almost worthless. From up close it still appears almost worthless, but looks misled. The reticule is the Victorian woman's solution to the pocket, a visible, fashionable substitute that announces, "Look, I carry items, but not excessively." Yours is robin's egg blue, slightly worn, a birthday present from your cousin who embroidered your initials into the lining in tiny, crooked thread. It's appealing, it's familiar, and it holds just enough. A handkerchief, a scent vial, a folded card, 3 coins, and a single key. What it won't accommodate: your gloves, your diary, your frustration. The reticule's very dimensions are a performance. It implies you have no burdens, no duties, no messy complications. You're light, agile, unburdened. You don't carry ledgers or receipts because someone else manages that. You don't carry work. You are work. You observe your neighbour struggle to squeeze her spectacles into a velvet reticule. Failing once more, she laughs it off, calls herself awkward. But you recognise the truth. There's no awkwardness here, just a design intended to limit, a fashionable prison lined in satin. Still, the reticule is not without influence. Women have long perfected the art of concealing meaning in small objects. Yours, for instance, contains a scrap of writing, folded paper, nearly rubbed smooth, with a date and a name you haven't spoken aloud in months. It remains there like a pressed flower, delicate and perilous. Sometimes, in quiet moments, you reach inside and run your fingers over it like prayer beads. And there are social customs too. The way you open it, precisely so during tea, offering a glimpse of lace or letter, a suggestion of intrigue. The way you let it suspend from your wrist as you walk, swinging with each step, like punctuation. In the absence of words, a reticule can communicate plenty. There are guidelines, naturally. You never set it on the floor, uncouth. Never search it too long in public, frantic. Never let it bulge with irregular shapes, uncontrolled. You once witnessed a woman produce a crust of bread from hers. The room fell silent. But still, in that tiny pouch, you carry the things that signify. The note, the coin for emergencies, the soft square of cloth scented with lavender. And something else. Something you almost overlooked. A ring. Not yours. You hadn't intended to keep the ring, not truly. It tumbled into your reticule during that final conversation, if you could even call it a conversation. More like an exchange of glances, a trembling of fingers, a sigh that conveyed everything and nothing all at once. He positioned it on the table between you, wrapped in a silk handkerchief. "Keep it or discard it," he said, avoiding your eyes. "But if you carry it, you carry the decision." And then he departed, quietly, like something slipping through the cracks in a wall. You carried it. Initially you convinced yourself it was temporary, just until you decided, just until the storm subsided, just until your head cleared. But now, months later, it's still in the bottom of your reticule, wrapped and concealed beneath the everyday items. A peppermint lozenge, a pencil stub, the frayed corner of a letter you've read far too many times. The ring itself is simple gold, slightly warm from touch, with a narrow twist at the band. No stone, just the memory of a promise never spoken. There's something distinctly Victorian about it all, carrying a life-altering decision in a pouch the size of a scone. You think of the women who preceded you, Their reticules holding locks of hair, secret correspondence, tiny bottles of bitters or laudanum. One friend once confessed keeping a pressed moth in hers for good fortune. Another admitted to smuggling out her husband's will during a family quarrel. "No one inspects a woman's handbag," she whispered, eyes gleaming. And they don't, because they presume it's trivial, a decoration, a thing with tassels and ribbon and no importance. But you know differently. You could alter your future with the contents of this pouch. As you walk into the shop this afternoon, chin elevated, gloves fastened, reticule swinging lightly at your wrist, you feel the weight of it. Not heavy, not crushing, just present. A quiet reminder that in a world where women are meant to be decorative, even the smallest container can hold something powerful. You reach into your reticule to pay for a spool of thread. The coins jingle, the paper rustles. Your fingers brush the corner of the handkerchief, but you don't unwrap it. Not yet. You're sitting at your vanity, fastening the tiny mother-of-pearl buttons on your gloves, when you hear the faint clink, metal against wood. Again you sigh. Another hairpin has escaped. You retrieve it from the floor, slipping it back into your little tin, marked pins and hooks, a container that now rattles like a pocket full of secrets. Because that's the thing nobody warns you about. Being a Victorian woman means waging a quiet battle with your own wardrobe. You begin the daily ritual, checking every fastening. You twist around, peering over your shoulder at the row of buttons running up the back of your dress. They look delicate, like sugar pearls, but they are in fact the adversary. There are 18 of them, and not one can be reached without dislocating a shoulder or summoning the maid. You sigh again and begin with what you can. The cuffs, the gloves, the boots, and, oh, the boots. You reach for your button hook, that peculiar little tool that lives somewhere between a crochet needle and a torture instrument. It's made of polished bone and fits perfectly in your gloved hand. With a flick and twist, it slips through the buttonholes on your ankle boots, fastening each obstinate little disc that your fingers, wrapped in silk, couldn't possibly manage alone. It takes time, precision, patience. A pinched finger here, a tugged thread there. You wince slightly as one button bites into your knuckle. These boots are narrow, designed not for walking but for displaying. There's a distinction. Once you observed a gentleman attempt to fasten a lady's boots without a hook. It took him 20 minutes and ended with a broken nail, a snapped button, and a flushed apology. You vowed never to let anyone else do it again. But button hooks aren't just for boots. You keep a second one for gloves. And a third, shorter, sharper, for your bodice. There are hooks for corsets, hooks for petticoat clasps, hooks so thin they look like they belong in a dentist's drawer. You've developed small calluses on your palms from using them daily. A badge of hidden labour. And then there are the hairpins. Dozens of them, scattered across your vanity like fallen soldiers. Some are curved, some straight, some grip like iron. Others slide out the moment you laugh too hard. You've had one pierce through your hat and nick your scalp. At a funeral. You said nothing. Naturally. In your workbox you keep a set of extra pins, a spare button hook, and a pair of tiny embroidery scissors that double as weapons in a pinch. Last year, a friend of yours used hers to cut herself free from a corset during a fainting spell. Another jabbed hers into the hand of a man who stepped too close during a crowded train ride. An accident, she said sweetly. The blood said otherwise. These are the quiet tools of survival. Not just dressing aids, not just accessories, but the sharp, cold proof that elegance has a price, and it's paid in bruised fingers, snagged lace, and the steely patience to never, ever let anyone see you struggle. You place the last pin into your hair and examine yourself in the mirror. Everything looks smooth, effortless. But you know what's holding it all together. Steel, bone, pressure, and the quiet cooperation of countless tiny tools. Your hands bear the marks of the morning's labour. A red line across the base of your palm from the button hook. A slight bruise at your wrist where your glove caught too tight. A flake of dried blood near your thumb where a corset stay pinched the skin. None of it shows. Of course, that's the purpose. And it's not just you. Every woman you know moves through the world with a miniature arsenal tucked into her person. One friend keeps a hat pin sharpened to a near needlepoint. It's for adjusting feathers, yes, but it's also there in case of situations. Another tucks a small sewing needle into her glove cuff, threaded and ready because buttons fall and society doesn't wait. You remember your aunt telling you about a scandal where a lady's dress came undone at the shoulder mid-ball? The hook had snapped and the poor girl fled the room in tears. Since then, your aunt wears hidden stitches in her gown, a thread loop anchoring bodice to corset. Invisible, but unbreakable. A stitch in time prevents disgrace, she says. You've copied her technique faithfully. Even your accessories aren't exempt. Your brooch isn't just ornamental. It hides a tiny screwdriver gifted to you by a cousin who repairs spectacles. You've used it 3 times. Once to tighten a drawer pull, once to wedge a jammed window open, and once to repair a carriage lantern when the driver was too intoxicated to notice it had come loose. Everything you carry has a hidden purpose. Your chatelaine jingles lightly with scissors, keys and vinaigrette. But the real secret is the needle case you've hollowed out to hide your emergency funds. A few silver shillings, tightly rolled banknotes, and one very small bottle of laudanum, just in case the pain ever becomes too much to bear in public. You never considered yourself as clever, but you've learned the hard way. Learned how to pin without pricking, how to hook without tearing, how to smile while stitching a hem beneath the table during tea. Once, you even repaired the strap of your shoe mid-walk with a hairpin and a prayer. Because if there's one thing Victorian fashion teaches you, it's nothing is truly secure. Not buttons, not locks, not reputations. Everything must be reinforced, clasped, repinned or watched constantly. You step back from the mirror and smooth your skirts once more. Every layer is in place, every fastening firm. But just in case, you slip one more pin into your sleeve and feel its tiny strength against your wrist. A lady, after all, must always be prepared to hold herself together, even when everything else threatens to come undone. You finally made it through the day. The hustle, the errands, the social pleasantries. Now the light is fading, the lamp is lit, and it's time to undress. You exhale as your fingers fumble at the buttons, loosening the bodice, then untying the layers beneath. Your corset comes off with a sigh so deep it feels like it comes from your ribs. But even now, comfort isn't guaranteed. You reach for your nightgown. It's thick, made of brushed cotton or wool flannel depending on the season. Tonight's feels especially heavy, like pulling on a curtain. The sleeves puff at the shoulder, then narrow at the wrist. There's embroidery at the collar, your initials stitched by candlelight when you were younger before your fingers began to ache from daily sewing. This isn't some silky, flowing garment that billows as you twirl. This is Victorian nightwear. Practical, opaque, more fortress than fantasy. And under it, still more layers. A night chemise maybe. Long drawers, unless it's the height of summer. Socks always, even a nightcap, though you sometimes toss it off in your sleep. You've woken more than once with the ribbon mark still etched across your forehead. You slip into bed and pull the heavy wool blanket over your legs. It smells faintly of lavender and the scorched iron you used to press it. You adjust the hot brick at your feet, wrapped in flannel, still radiating heat from the stove. Downstairs there's no central heating, no warm floors, no gentle hum of a radiator. Warmth is built manually and slowly escapes. And the air, cold, always cold. You breathe and see your breath hover above the blankets before dissolving. You clutch the covers tighter. It's strange to think of nightgowns as a battlefield, but they are. You once heard a woman joke that putting one on was like preparing for a siege. One must be ready for fire, visitors or death, she said. She wasn't mistaken. Modesty must be maintained even in slumber. A friend of yours once tore her nightgown escaping a fire, and despite the panic, she cried over the fact that the doctor saw her in just a chemise. She had burns on her arm, but what really hurt was the embarrassment. You tug your own collar higher now, just in case. Not because you expect anything, but because it's how you were taught. Proper women don't let the night catch them unprepared. And just as you begin to drift, you feel a familiar itch at the hem of your gown. You reach down and find a thread loose again. That's the third time this week. You make a mental note to repair it. Tomorrow, though you know it might be next week before you remember. Still in the silence, wrapped in wool and linen and the quiet pressure of night, there's a kind of safety. You're armoured, even now. Sleep doesn't come quickly, not with the nightgown twisting at your knees and the blanket's weight pressing down like damp earth. You shift slightly, trying to find that elusive spot where the fabric doesn't bunch and the brick at your feet still feels warm. It's always like this, cosy, but never quite comfortable. You listen to the house settling, a creak in the rafters, the distant clatter of the maid finishing her chores below, a drip somewhere from the wash basin. The sounds are familiar, almost comforting, but they don't ease the feeling of being swaddled like a parcel. Nightwear in your world isn't about rest, it's about readiness. Even now your hair is loosely braided to avoid scandalous tangles. You wear socks because bare feet are indecent. Your nightgown, with its high collar and long sleeves, could pass for a day dress, if viewed in the wrong light. And for many women, it has been. Fires, illness, the surprise of a midnight knock. You recall the story of a woman down the street whose brother returned from the war without warning. She greeted him at the door in her nightgown, and the neighbours whispered for weeks. That's why some women sleep with dressing gowns folded at the foot of the bed, just in case. You do too. Yours is a plain blue flannel wrap, slightly frayed at the hem, but always pressed and ready. One tug, and you could be presentable in under 30 seconds. Still, not everything about this ritual is restraint. Your nightgown, for all its thickness, carries memories. The faded stitching at the sleeve reminds you of evenings spent reading by firelight. The tiny patched spot near the knee recalls the night you spilled lavender oil and tried to blot it out before anyone noticed. It still smells faintly of flowers and embarrassment. You've had this gown for years, re-hemmed it twice, sewn new buttons on the collar. Once during a head cold, you wore it for 3 days straight, and it comforted you more than your family did. It holds your shape when folded. It remembers the curve of your spine. Even so, you sometimes envy the freedom you imagine other women might have, those fictional women in French novels who sleep in gauze and silk, who leave their shoulders bare to moonlight. You tried that once, years ago, with a borrowed dressing robe. You caught a chill that lasted a week and swore never again, so now you lie beneath your thick blanket, wrapped in layers, knowing full well that comfort was never the goal. Cleanliness, modesty, preparation. These are the pillars of Victorian rest, and still you sleep, slowly, deeply, with the weight of your gown anchoring you to the bed. It may be stiff, itchy and unnecessarily warm, but it's yours. It's familiar. And for now, that's enough. You pull the covers up to your chin and drift toward dreams that smell faintly of starch and soap. The morning sun is barely a suggestion through the curtains when you hear the soft jingle, a tiny clink of metal on metal like a wind chime, deep in a forest. You reach to your side and feel it, the weighty presence hanging from your waistband beneath your dressing gown, your chatelaine. It's not a name you speak often, but you always know it's there. A chain of little tools, small scissors, a thimble, a needle case, a vinaigrette, and your most prized possession, the household keys. You lift your chatelaine into the light and examine it as you've done every morning for years. The polished steel glints faintly, dulled in places from handling. Each tool swings from its own little chain clipped onto the decorative clasp at your waist. Some women wear theirs like jewellery, silver-plated, monogrammed, even adorned with cameos. Yours is simpler, practical and slightly mismatched, a gift from your mother when she passed her keys to you. That was the day you became mistress of the house, not just in title, but in expectation. The scissors are small, but sharp enough to snip through corset strings or stubborn thread. You use them daily, mending, trimming, correcting. You once used them to cut a roast string when the cook went home sick. The handle bears a tiny nick from that very day. Next to them hangs your needle case, shaped like a tiny cylinder. Inside, 3 steel needles, one slightly bent from overuse, and a coil of dark thread. You keep them, not just for convenience, but for emergencies. Popped buttons, frayed seams, even unexpected tears in the lace tablecloth before tea. And then there's the vinaigrette, a tiny hinged case with a perforated lid. Inside, a sponge soaked in lavender vinegar. It's your quiet defence against faintness, filth, or the smell of illness. More than once you've pressed it to your nose while visiting someone's sickbed. It feels strangely intimate to carry a tool both for comfort and protection, like a charm from another time. But none of these things compare to the keys. 4 of them hang in a row, each distinct. One for the pantry, one for the silver drawer, one for the linen press, and the smallest for your own writing desk. They swing like medals of quiet power. No man in the house knows which key opens what. That's your realm. You remember the first time a maid asked you for the sugar key? Your hand shook slightly as you handed it over, then took it back just as quickly. With those keys came control, but also duty. You're the first to rise, the last to sleep. You approve the accounts, track the soap rations, count the spoons. Every time something goes missing, every time something runs low, it's your name, the butler whispers. Behind closed doors, even your sleep is lighter now. You listen for movement in the night, footsteps on the stair, the rattle of a coal bin, the squeak of a pantry door. You never expected keys to keep you awake, but they do. You fasten the chatelaine at your waist again. The weight is familiar, like the hem of responsibility brushing your hip. And so the day begins with scissors, keys, and the quiet clink of command. By late morning the house is fully alive, pots rattling in the kitchen, footsteps tapping across the upper hall, and someone downstairs is already asking where the sugar has gone. You reach for your chatelaine again, fingers instinctively seeking the pantry key. It turns in your hand like an old friend, warmed by years of use and quiet authority. The staff doesn't question the key bearer, not because they're afraid, but because the role itself commands a certain reverence. You're the one who balances thrift and grace, who decides whether the good jam is opened for guests or saved for Sunday. A woman who wears the chatelaine wears the weight of the household's rhythm. Still, there's more than order hanging from your waist. The vinaigrette swings gently as you descend the stairs. You crack it open for a moment, letting the vinegar-scented air clear your head. The parlour smells faintly of last night's coal fire, and you have a headache building just behind your temples. A quick breath through the tiny silver case and you feel sharper, awake. Your grandmother used to say the chatelaine was the closest a woman could get to carrying a sword. Hers had a letter opener instead of scissors and a small flask tucked beside her keys. You found it once, long after she passed. The metal was engraved with the initials of a man no one in the family dared mention. Not everything on a chatelaine is practical. You've added a few pieces of your own, a tiny notepad tucked inside a folding silver case where you scribble household notes or the occasional private thought when the mood strikes. And hanging beside it, a pencil stub sharpened with your sewing scissors, still etched with the name of the stationer who once pressed it into your hand and called you dangerously observant. You've never quite figured out if that was meant as a compliment. These objects don't just organise your day, they tell your story. The scissors dulled by love letters cut into ribbons, the thimble dented by a dropped baking tray, the key that no longer fits any door but you wear anyway, because it reminds you of something you won't speak aloud. At gatherings, other women glance at your waist and nod. Chatelaines clink together in unspoken conversation. You once saw one that held a miniature portrait in a locket dangling beside a tape measure. Another bore a whistle discreetly hung between a spool of thread and a needle case. "For when my boys fight," the woman said with a grin that revealed one gold tooth. And of course, the status they represent isn't just domestic. A well-worn chatelaine marks you as capable, trusted, indispensable. You're the one who knows where the brandy is hidden, when the milk delivery is due, and how many towels are still clean after the cousin from Devon arrived unannounced. When you finally sit down to mend a tear in the dining room curtain, you lift the scissors from your hip without thinking. Snip, thread, pinch, tie. The rhythm is part of you now. Each piece of the chatelaine moves with muscle memory, quiet, precise, unyielding, and when the day ends and the house grows quiet, you'll unclip it gently, place it on the velvet tray by your bed and exhale, but not before checking one last time that all 4 keys are still there. You're sitting near the window with a teacup cooling in your hand when you catch your reflection in the glass. You smile faintly and then you remember. Don't smile too wide. You've trained yourself not to. Not because of manners or modesty or any notion of feminine restraint, but because of your teeth. They've never been quite right, yellowed slightly from years of tea, a tiny crack in the front tooth from biting into an almond that was too hard back in '79, a bottom row that sits crooked no matter what lace you wear to hide it. But the real problem, the thing that stops you from laughing out loud or smiling without holding back, is the growing space in the back where 2 molars used to be. You lost them when you were young. The dentist, if that's even what you'd call him, worked with a clamp, a towel, and a bottle of gin. You were 17. You've never been quite the same. In your world, teeth are more than just something you chew with. They're about standing, about how people see you, and they cost a fortune. You know women who've gotten false teeth made from walrus ivory, porcelain, or even real human teeth taken from dead bodies and attached to gold wire. A cousin of yours got a partial plate fitted last winter. She accidentally took it out at dinner and it fell into her soup. Nobody said anything, but everybody saw. Then again, the opposite situation can be just as strange. You met a woman once at a garden party whose teeth were completely black, not from rot by choice. She'd spent time in the East, and in certain cultures it's seen as beautiful, even dignified, to have teeth as black as ink. She spoke quietly, with a smile that seemed to float like a shadow. It was striking, disturbing, captivating. You couldn't look away. And there's the widow who doesn't wear any teeth at all. She chews slowly, hums when she's anxious, and drinks her soup with quiet elegance. Nobody feels sorry for her. She has a presence. She's come to terms with her gums. But you're stuck somewhere in between. Not rich enough to afford a proper dental plate, not brave enough to accept the flaws, not old enough to justify them. So you do what most women do. You smile with your lips closed. You turn your head away when you laugh. You hold your tongue against the roof of your mouth to hide the gap. And you keep a clove in your bag, not for your breath, but for the dull pain that sometimes comes back in the back of your jaw long after those molars are gone. A young man once told you your smile was nice, said it reminded him of something comforting. You blushed naturally and looked away, not because you were shy, but because you were grateful he hadn't noticed the missing tooth. You drink your tea now, cold and still, and run your finger along the edge of the cup. You've thought about writing to that new dentist in Kensington, the one with the chair without mirrors and chloroform, but you're not ready. Instead, you dab your mouth with a napkin, sit up straighter, and rehearse your most refined half-smile, the one that reveals nothing. Later in the evening, you sit in front of the mirror and look at your mouth, not because you're vain, but because you're curious. You open your lips just a little and run your fingertip along the ridge of your gum. The gap is still there, obviously. You've gotten used to it being gone. But something hurts underneath it tonight. Not in a physical way, not completely. A kind of silent anger. You think about the ads in the paper. False teeth so realistic they even trick the person wearing them. You wonder what that actually means. How could someone forget that part of them isn't genuine? But so many people do. The women at church, the matron at the hospital, even the woman who owns the dressmaker's shop, who lost almost all her teeth after a fever and now has a flawless porcelain smile. You heard her laugh one time. It sounded empty, fragile and too cheerful, like a cup about to shatter. Still, you feel jealous, because while they can take off their imperfections and store them in velvet boxes, you live with yours and hide them every day. You open your drawer and take out the small jar of tooth powder. It's chalky and minty, made from burned shells and soap and sometimes crushed charcoal. You dip your brush into it, not because you think it'll work wonders, but because routines bring comfort. Some women scrub their teeth with salt, others use lemon peel or baking soda. You once tried a recipe from Mrs. Beeton's household guide that involved myrrh and sage boiled into a rinse. It stung, but it made you feel briefly like you had control. You remember your mother's advice. A woman's smile is her introduction. You were 12 and she had just removed a thread from your sleeve before a dinner guest showed up. You didn't grasp the importance of it back then. Now you do, which is why you've accepted the half smile, the turned face, the soft laugh behind a gloved hand. You've mastered the technique of laughing without showing your teeth. But not every moment allows for such composure. At a wedding last spring, you were taken by surprise. The groom, barely 20, with dimples like teacups, cracked a joke during the ceremony. You laughed hard, freely. It rang out in the church, and for a moment you forgot to conceal it. You saw your reflection later in the shiny surface of a serving tray. The gap shone like a crack in porcelain, but that smile, that instant, was genuine, and for once you didn't pull back. Now you shut the drawer. Watch the candlelight flicker across your jaw and trace the shape of your lip. Maybe someday you'll have the money and nerve to see the Kensington dentist. Maybe you won't. But tonight, in the silence of your room, you smile, fully. Just for yourself. No audience, no mirrors, no embarrassment. Just you and a mouth that's been through things. The cupboard squeaks as you pull it open, showing a line of small bottles, brown glass with cork stoppers, some with worn labels peeling at the corners. You grab the one labelled tonic for nerves. The liquid inside moves thickly, the colour of weak tea, though it smells sharp, sweet, and strangely medicinal. Your head has been throbbing since this morning. Not a stabbing pain, but the kind that sits behind your eyes like a guest too polite to go. You uncork the bottle, pour some into the silver-plated teaspoon and swallow. It's bitter, heavy with herbs, maybe a hint of molasses, and something else, something warm and calming. You sit down carefully, feeling the familiar wave of peace spread through your chest. The label doesn't list what's inside, not precisely, but you've read enough to make a guess. Laudanum, probably some morphine if the pharmacist was feeling generous. Your aunt used to call it her cure. Your cousin said it helped her sleep peacefully. You just call it Thursday, because in a Victorian home, medicines are everywhere, and most of them would horrify your modern doctor. There's the camphor oil you massage into your temples, the one that makes your eyes water if you use too much. The small blue pills for women's problems, which you think are just sugar and iron. The bottle of syrup of figs for digestion, which tastes exactly like it sounds, and works exactly like punishment. And the notorious family cough remedy, equal parts honey, brandy, vinegar and turpentine. You've had it twice this week. It tastes like making a mistake. Your father's cabinet holds even stronger things. Chloroform, sealed and wrapped in fabric. Nitrate of silver, spirits of ammonia. You once watched him treat a wound with carbolic acid, and he didn't react. You did. It smelled like death in liquid form, but it's the homemade treatments that carry the most appeal and risk. You've tried onion compresses for chest colds, garlic syrup for fevers, a mustard plaster once slapped onto your back during a chill so intense you thought your teeth would shatter. It burned, blistered, and left a pale yellow mark on your shoulder that stayed for 2 weeks. And then there's castor oil. Always castor oil for constipation, for skin, for hair, for anything nobody can figure out. You force it down with tea, wince and wait. It always does the job, but it never feels merciful either. You look again at your shelf filled with quiet poisons disguised as kindness. You've become good at measuring doses. A few drops for anxiety, a capful for cramps, a heavy pour for sadness. You once gave a neighbour the wrong bottle, meant to give her tonic, handed her syrup of poppies instead. She slept for 14 hours and missed her niece's baptism. You've never admitted it, and yet you hold on to these bottles, these powders, these jars of roots and salves because they're all you have. You're supposed to bear pain without mentioning it. These are your tools, your comforts, your small act of defiance against suffering in silence. As the tonic sinks into your bones, you finally breathe slow, warm, even. You'll feel better soon, at least for a short time. The fire pops softly next to you as the tonic moves deeper into your limbs. You settle back in the armchair and listen to the gentle tick of the clock on the shelf. 3 seconds of quiet between thoughts. The sharpness of your headache fades, not gone, but softened, like a face behind cloudy glass. This is what counts as medicine in your world. A cabinet of bitters, burns and bottles shrouded in mystery. You know every label from memory, some handwritten in shaky script, others mass-printed with phrases like trusted for ladies' health or approved by royal households. But none of them include directions, only tales. There's the cough syrup your cousin drank that turned her tongue black. The tonic that made your sister sleep for 2 full days. The colic drops that silenced a baby's crying and some whispered stopped his breathing. But none of it is forbidden because pain isn't the problem. It's showing it. If you can walk, smile, nod, and say, "I'm fine," you're treated accordingly. So you measure carefully, quietly, and share recipes only with women you believe in. Your friend Eleanor makes her own mixtures from herbs she grows in clay pots by the window. Chamomile for sleep, valerian for anxiety, licorice root for sore throats. You once helped her boil a blend of wormwood and clove into a dark syrup. You said it looked like ink and tasted like bitterness. She laughed and then sealed it tight for winter. You still keep that bottle in your cupboard for emergencies, but not every treatment is taken internally. Some are carried. Your great-aunt sewed dried tansy leaves into her corset for the womb. Another neighbour pins a bag of dried yarrow near her slip, swearing it prevents female sadness. You've started keeping a bit of rosemary in your pocket just because it smells fresh, and sometimes that's sufficient. Still, it's the stronger remedies you think about when the world weighs too heavily. The laudanum with its amber haze, the bromide powders tucked into paper packets, the clove oil for toothaches that deadens more than just the gum. All instruments in a kit you didn't request, but learned to use because a Victorian woman must never reveal her pain. She must carry it, contain it, and when she can, disguise it with syrup and a smile. You sip tea now, made with crushed mint and a single drop of violet extract. It tastes of gardens and medicine, and something else, something ancient. You once heard a midwife say, "Every woman is her own healer." At the time, it sounded beautiful. Now it sounds like a way to survive. You glance at the fireplace, light dancing on the bottles. Tomorrow you'll clean the spoon and label a fresh jar. Maybe a lemon balm mixture. Maybe something more potent. But tonight you let the warmth surround you. The tonic eases the ache in your jaw. The darkness settles across the room. Your breathing slows. You'll get by, you always do, with your cabinet of silent remedies and the understanding that nobody sees what it takes. You stop on the front steps, one gloved hand steadying your hat, the other gripping your skirts. The wind has strengthened, and with it comes a struggle you face every time you step outside. The hat you're wearing today is simple, wide-brimmed with silk trim and a stiff velvet ribbon under your chin. It's not the most extravagant one you own, not even the biggest, but still it catches the wind like a sail pulling at your scalp. With each gust you lean your head forward and push a pin deeper into your hair. The pin stabs. You flinch. But the hat holds. Going bareheaded in public isn't possible. You might as well appear in your undergarments. Victorian hats are more than decoration. They're social armour. Being seen without one is unimaginable, even inside. In certain settings, a lady's hat stays put. At church, in stores, during visits, the hat becomes part of you like a name you can't remove. You walk cautiously now, aware of how the brim blocks your view. You have to turn your head to see the curb tilt slightly to fit through a doorway. Once, at a garden party, your hat was so wide it brushed two people at the same time as you walked past. They laughed. You acted like you didn't notice. Later that day, you discovered twigs caught in the feathers, mementos from a low branch. And then there's the heaviness. Your Sunday hat weighs more than your cat. Plumes, fake fruits, velvet flowers, even small stuffed birds. Each piece a fashion choice, each fastened with a collection of hat pins sharp enough to pierce skin. You've had marks on your scalp. Once your hat was so heavy it caused a headache that lasted 3 days. But you wear it willingly, because the hat does something a corset can't. It declares, it communicates class, style and refinement before you even open your mouth. And the millinery competition is fierce. At every gathering, every walk through Hyde Park, every visit to the theatre, there's a silent evaluation. Who has the tallest feathers, the most unusual decoration? You once saw a hat shaped like a swan, neck bent in mid-cry. It looked ridiculous. You loved it. You remember one dinner where a guest wouldn't take off her bonnet, even when the soup arrived. She said it was part of the look. The host later claimed she used it to avoid making eye contact. Either way, it succeeded. You adjust your own brim as a carriage rumbles by. The wind lifts the feathers a little. You press the hat down with a strong palm. It fights back. You prevail. A man walks past without a hat, unaware of the effort required just to keep yours on. You look at his bare head and feel a wave of resentment. He can walk freely, see clearly, hear without interference. You, on the other hand, are wearing a hat that could function as both a small umbrella and a weapon. And yet when you catch yourself in a shop window, you smile, because the hat isn't just a burden, it's an achievement. And even if your neck hurts by evening, even if the pins leave indents and your ears ring from the weight, you'll wear it again tomorrow without question. By late afternoon, your hat has gotten heavier still. Not from added weight, it hasn't changed, but from hours of maintaining posture, of modifying your walk, of bending through narrow doorways and holding your chin exactly right. The hat is as much a practice as a piece of clothing. You arrive at your friend's drawing room, face flushed from the walk. She welcomes you with a smile and right away praises your decoration. Peacock, right? You nod. It is, but just barely. A trimmed, faded version from last season, rescued and re-dyed. You're not ashamed. In fact, you're quietly pleased with the fix. You did it yourself with a jar of ink, a dry brush, and one sleepless night. Across the room, a young woman shifts her head and the entire left side of her hat trembles. An ivory rose, a stuffed sparrow and a fan of gauze are shakily stitched together. Gorgeous. Absurd. You can't stop looking. She meets your gaze and smiles. For a moment, you're not rivals, you're allies. Because women in hats understand something that men never grasp. The delicate, bold act of balancing ridiculousness with grace. During tea, you set your gloves carefully on your lap and turn slightly to keep your brim from hitting the person next to you. She's done the same. It's a dance of shadows and feathers. You both tilt like trees in a hard wind, smiling politely. Under 4 pounds of seasonal fashion, and always the pins. You feel them even now, 4 of them, holding the hat to your hair. You could list their positions like directions. 1 at the top, 1 through the bun, 2 behind the ears. If one shifts, you'll notice immediately, as if the whole thing might fall apart in humiliation. It's occurred before. You once endured a dinner party in quiet terror, pretending your hat wasn't tilting like a sinking vessel. Of course, there are tales, myths even, about hat pins. One woman stabbed a pickpocket's hand on a crowded streetcar. Another pinned her hat so deeply into her hair that she had to cut herself free that night. And everyone's heard about the lady who nodded too eagerly during a lecture and stabbed herself behind the ear. Still, despite the hazard, you wear your pins with pride. They're the invisible framework of your day. Nobody sees them, but everyone sees what they accomplish. You, composed, steady, proper. As the sun drops and your visit ends, you rise, smoothing your skirts and reaching carefully for your chin strap. You loosen it a bit, not off, naturally, just enough to feel your skin again. Air touches your jaw, and it feels like release. On the walk home, the wind has died down. The streets are emptier. You pass a shop window and glimpse yourself, hat angled just so, profile clean and framed, the feathers catching the last golden light. You don't smile. You raise your chin because even if your scalp throbs, even if your ears are sore and your neck stiff, you understand the authority of a hat worn well. And tomorrow you'll select another, maybe something broader, maybe something with just a bit more risk. Back home, you untie your hat with a breath of relief and set it carefully on the dresser, feathers swaying slightly, as if they're also exhaling. The pins come out one by one, pulled free gently, their tips still shining. Your scalp pulses faintly from the pressure they've maintained all day. But you're not finished yet. There's still a drawer to examine before bed. It's the small one hidden beneath your writing desk. The one you never talk about and yet open every night. You slide it out now, fingers brushing its contents like touching memories laid out flat. Letters, pieces of ribbon, a coin, and then what you're looking for. A lock of hair tied with worn blue thread. This drawer, this private collection, is your hidden world. The lock came from your sister. She died 4 winters ago. Fever, quick and merciless. You cut it from her comb before they close the casket. You haven't mentioned it to anyone, but each night you untie the thread just to hold it again. It still carries a faint scent of camphor and rosemary rinse. You don't weep, not these days. But you also haven't let go. Underneath it is a folded note. The ink has smudged slightly over time, but you know every word. It's not romantic, not exactly. Just a line from someone who once said your eyes looked like bruised plums. Strange. A bit insulting. But it made you laugh for 3 days, and you've saved it since he left for Canada. Or was it India? You've lost track, but the note stays. There's a miniature there too, no bigger than a cookie, painted on ivory. A serious man in profile. A relation, maybe. You found it at the bottom of an old sewing box and never asked who he was, but you liked his expression. He seemed like someone who paid attention. And tucked under the velvet lining, your real prize, a pressed violet, brown with age, folded into a page from a hymnal. You don't recall where you picked it. Maybe a funeral. Maybe a spring walk where someone held your arm longer than needed. You've never unfolded the page. Every woman you know has a drawer like this, or a box or a jar on the highest shelf. Your mother kept one under her mattress. Your friend Eleanor hides hers behind the pantry wall. One lady you met at church keeps hers in the hollow of an old Bible. They think it's devotion, she whispered once, eyes sparkling, but it's just remembering. These are the things women hold on to. Not in handbags, not in jewellery boxes, but in silence. You return each object to its spot, smoothing them down. You pause over the hair, always the hair. Then tie the thread again, softly. The knot is intentionally loose. You might need to open it tomorrow or the day after. You close the drawer softly, with the kind of attention usually given to sleeping babies or fragile pastries. A quiet click, and then the world settles itself. The secrets are hidden away again. You stand, stretch a little, and feel the crack in your shoulders. The house is silent now, except for the clock ticking quietly and the faint movement of the maid downstairs. Nobody will bother you, not tonight. But your mind stays with that drawer. There's something about those hidden things that feels more genuine than anything else you've handled today. More truthful than your dress, more reliable than the Sunday dinner. They hold parts of you that nobody else witnesses, parts you sometimes forget exist, and yet every night you come back to them like rituals. You recall your grandmother, hands lined like a map, sitting by the fire and telling you a woman's drawer is where her voice goes when nobody's listening. At the time, you didn't get it. Now it feels like the most honest thing you've learned, because it's not just about mementos, it's about allowance. The liberty to mourn, to love, to remember, to do all the things you're supposed to tidy away. You were taught how to entertain, how to sew, how to pour tea without making a mess, but nobody taught you how to release a memory that smells like rosemary and cold winter air. So instead, you save it, you flatten it and call it the past. Some women burn their letters, others cut them into lace and use them for drawer liners. You never could. Even the envelope is important. Even the stamp, that crooked postmark from Yorkshire, feels as real to you as a whispered farewell. You think of your friend who keeps her late husband's collar button in a matchbox next to her gloves. She cleans it once a year. He despised that shirt, she told you, then grinned, which is precisely why I kept it. You understand, because women's lives are filled with moments too small to grieve publicly. A broken comb, a cancelled invitation, the last piece of cake eaten by someone who didn't think to ask. We're supposed to bear it all, but invisibly, gracefully. And so we do. In drawers, behind books, beneath floorboards. You once read about a woman who stitched her grief into a patchwork quilt, each square sewn with something nobody else would ever understand. You wonder how many homes are covered in silent sadness, spread out on beds mistaken for simple comfort. You light your candle for bed and look one more time at the closed drawer. Nobody else will open it, and even if they did, they wouldn't get it. They'd see junk. You see a life. Morning arrives with a bang, a broom against the downstairs wall, the clang of dishes and the shrill voice of Mrs. Fielding scolding the scullery maid. You sit up slowly, blinking the soreness from your neck. Your legs are still tangled in last night's nightgown, twisted like rope. You swing them over the edge of the bed and slip your feet into your slippers. Today, like every day, starts with shoes. You pick up the pair from under the dressing screen. Ankle boots shine to a soft gleam. They've got delicate small heels, just tall enough to look refined, just short enough to be bearable. The leather is snug around the arch and the buttons on the side taunt you with their neat arrangement. It'll take 5 full minutes, and the button hook to close them. You know this because you track it every day. You slide your feet in. The shoes don't welcome you like old companions. They pinch, they squeeze. The left one digs a little near the toe where the leather has split and been mended. The right heel is unbalanced from use. You think about putting in a bit of folded paper, your usual trick, but decide against it. It never stays put anyway. Victorian women's shoes aren't designed for walking. Not truly. They're designed for looking right, to peek out from under your skirt to show that you're elegant, graceful, ladylike. They're supposed to imply you float, not march. Which is a nice thought until you have to cross a cobbled street covered with horse manure and rain. You remember last winter when you slipped on Crown Hill trying to catch a runaway letter, your foot skidded on a stone and you landed in a puddle deep enough to soak through your stocking. The shoe ripped at the seam. That same afternoon, the cobbler said you twisted the leather in an improper way, as if walking quickly were some kind of offence against design. Today you're only going to the grocer. You hope the street won't be wet. Your soles are thin enough to feel every rock. There are fashionable boots with stronger soles, but they're looked down on in town. Too manly, they say. You once tried wearing a man's old pair in the garden and were told by your aunt that a lady's feet must never suggest rebellion. So here you are, fastening delicate boots on a body that has things to accomplish. And it's not just the discomfort, it's the illusion. The shoes are so tight they've altered the shape of your feet. You've noticed it in the bath, the toes curving inward, the arch rising unnaturally. Your friend Maggie has corns so severe she limps on Sundays, and still she wears the lace-up ivory ones to church because they coordinate with her gloves. You respect that. A woman wore boots to a suffragist rally once, flat, brown, made for walking. She spoke from the back of a wagon about the right to vote and the right to stand without toppling over. A few women mocked. One muttered, "Did you see her feet?" But you applauded quietly. Now, as you stand and take your first tentative steps, the leather groans, and the squeeze returns, the sound of propriety pressed into soles not made for stone. You walk, but carefully, because every step is a compromise between appearance and agony. Outside, the sky's the shade of spoiled milk, and the stones under your boots are wet from a morning mist. You step carefully, eyes searching the ground for puddles, loose stones, or anything that might undermine your balance. It's a particular talent, this Victorian walk, a slow, careful glide, determined not by elegance, but necessity. Your shoes work against you. Every few steps you sense the slip before it comes. You correct instinctively, ankles firm, knees slightly bent. Not because you've been instructed, but because you've discovered that the difference between walking gracefully and falling headfirst into a vegetable cart is half an inch of worn leather. You pass a boy racing in bare feet. He weaves between carts, laughing, his heels black with mud and happiness. You envy him for just a second. Then you look down at your own polished boots and remember what you'd be surrendering. Dirt is liberty, yes, but liberty leaves marks. You stop at the grocer's. It takes longer than you planned. There's a line, and your weight rocks from one aching foot to the other as you stand. No chair, no rest. Victorian fashion has no sympathy for waiting. Your arches burn and coldness creeps up your toes, but you stay poised. The woman ahead of you wears buttoned shoes with silk panels. Costly, impractical, beautiful. You spot a scratch on the outer edge of her left toe. You feel less isolated. The grocer acknowledges you finally. You nod back, collect your package, and start the walk home. The weight of the parcel pulls slightly to one side. You adjust again, always adjusting. And then, halfway up the lane, you sense it. A rip. A tiny noise, almost silent but certain. A seam coming apart. The outer leather of your right shoe has torn just near the base of the toe. A slow, steady opening like a secret you can't hide anymore. You don't pause. You can't. You shorten your steps and hope the split doesn't grow. You pray nobody sees, but someone always does. As you pass a woman at the lamppost, her eyes drop downward. A beat, then back up to your face. No words. Just that glance, that fraction of a second of recognition. Shame is a subtle thing. It doesn't shout. It exists in looks, in hesitations, in the way you press your shoe more tightly to the ground as if acting like nothing's wrong. When you get home, you take off your boots with tired hands. You run the tear with your fingertip. It isn't big, but it's sufficient. Sufficient to damage them. Sufficient to remind you how narrow the gap is between respectable and struggling. You'll fix it naturally. The cobbler will shake his head, say something about women's shoes being designed for appearance, not durability, and you'll nod. But you'll still wear them again because you must. Because shoes aren't just covering, they're evidence. Evidence that you're making an effort. That you still matter. You're walking the same cracked pavement as everyone else, but your head's held high and your spirits hanging on. For now. The parlour feels warm this afternoon, the fireplace crackling softly and the drapes pulled back just enough to ease the light. You ease into the tall-backed chair near the window and open your fan with a quiet snap. It's a practiced movement, smooth, easy but intentional, the sort of gesture that goes unnoticed unless you want it seen. Today you do. Your fan is ivory, etched in a spiralling design that catches the light. The silk panel is decorated with small violets, worn now, but still refined. It was a present from your cousin who said it once belonged to a teacher who married up. You've never checked the tale, but you enjoy the notion. The fan rests in your palm like it knows you. You shift it gently now, left to right, moving the air just enough to cool your face. But it's not the heat you're controlling, it's the instant. In Victorian life, a lady's fan is much more than protection from warmth. It's a dialect, a wordless cipher. You learned it when you were 14, though nobody said it plainly. You simply observed how one woman snapped hers open with a flick to express curiosity, how another pressed the spine against her mouth when showing disapproval, how an entire exchange occurred between two ladies at a summer dance without a single sentence uttered. You recall the disgrace when a young woman dropped her fan before the inappropriate gentleman. An accident, a provocation, a vicious prank. Nobody ever discovered the truth. But her betrothal ended within 2 weeks. Even now you employ your fan when your speech isn't permitted. In church, when someone's preaching veers into awkward ground, you lift it slightly, partly obscuring your expression as though stifling a yawn. At supper, when a visitor turns crude or the atmosphere grows too dense with tobacco smoke, you wave it leisurely, broadcasting displeasure. Nobody questions it, they simply respond. You once communicated an entire departure with your fan. A few purposeful looks across the space, a tap on your knee, a murmur behind silk, and then you'd vanished. Nobody watched the entrance swing open, nobody called your name. But you weren't noted as absent because your fan bid farewell on your behalf. And naturally, it's not always about fleeing. Sometimes the fan is bait. You've angled yours precisely to broadcast attraction, to conceal your grin from the guardian's attention, while exposing it to another. You've dropped it on purpose, to discover who'd pick it up. You've hidden behind it to mask embarrassment, or fake it. Right now, as you rest by the flames, you spot someone drawing near one of the lodgers, the reserved one with ink-stained sleeves and that tendency of nodding rather than talking. You don't stand, you don't utter a word. You raise your fan, close it deliberately, and place it across your lap. A simple action, but not without significance, because in a society where a lady's words are measured, her movements must carry weight. And the fan, more than boning or bonnet or kid glove, is her most articulate instrument. He nods passing by, gaze holding just slightly longer than manners permit. You remain silent. You simply lift your fan once more, angle it carefully, not for cooling, but to screen part of your expression. Enough intrigue to be recalled, not enough to be condemned. Instances like this are where the fan proves its worth. It's not solely about propriety or attraction, it's about authority. In a space where others write the regulations, you direct silence and display. With one sweep of your wrist, your fan stands between you and everything, a shield and a connection. Later, as visitors come for tea, the parlour swells with whispers. Swishing fabric, the ring of silver against china, and throughout, fans plumed, edged, illustrated, golden, fans that coordinate with gloves, fans that carry the scent of rose water, fans that conceal yawns, or worse, judgments. You observe as Mrs. Langley waves hers frantically while Miss Price recounts the tale about her sibling, brother's advancement. Too quick, too showy, a sign of scepticism. Across the space, a young lady lowers her fan just barely, while beaming toward a potential match. Hardly a shift, but the signal is unmistakable. And then there's you, still calculated, allowing your fan to settle on your lap again. Posture straight, lips silent. silent. There's something satisfying about conducting an exchange where nobody catches a sound. But not all fans are light-hearted. Some carry weight. You possess a black one, seldom touched, folded in paper at the base of a cabinet. Mourning fan, passed to you after your grandmother died. The silk is rigid, the borders decorated in jetstones that chime when moved. It's weighty, not in mass, but in implication. You've brought it out only twice. Once at a burial, once when you had nothing remaining to express and needed the room to sense it. The fan you hold today is easier, but equally effective. You've washed its silk yourself with a moist rag, secured the pin, treated the small joint with a dab of lavender essence. It squeaks slightly when unfolded, but you don't object. Its sound is growing older, more knowing, like yours. There was a period you handled it anxiously, uncertain how to maneuver it, when to display it, worried you'd flutter too rapidly and appear frantic, or too gradually and appear distant. But now the fan is part of your grip, like jewellery or prayer beads. It's an extension of intention. You fold it once more with a gentle snap. Someone across the space turns reflexively. The noise is distinctive, like the full stop at the conclusion of a statement nobody else would voice openly. And that's the wonder of it, isn't it? In a reality of boisterous men and cautious women, the fan allows you to communicate everything without lifting your voice. It is, ultimately, not merely decoration, but a blade wrapped in silk. The container sits behind the looking glass. You reach for it now, fingertips sliding past a weathered comb and a fractured powder case to grasp the cool, circular vessel. The top fights at first, stuck by duration and moisture, but you understand how to release it. A small rotation, a pull, and the weak smell of camphor and something vaguely citrus meets your senses. Inside, the cream is thick off-white, with a consistency somewhere between paste and fat. You gather out just a touch with your fingertip as you've practiced every night for years and press it softly under your eyes. The chill is abrupt at first, then soothing. The cream absorbs into your flesh, like an old companion. This is Roland Calidor, or what substitutes for it now. You've refilled the container twice. Once with a homemade mixture you crafted from glycerin and milk, and once with something acquired cheaply from a wandering chemist who insisted it was Parisian in origin. You didn't trust him, but purchased it regardless. The container felt too hollow otherwise, because truly the container is more than lotion. It's expectation, concentrated expectation that your flesh might stay tender through the soot, that your face might keep some colour despite the London haze, that you might glance in the mirror and recognise the young woman you were before you washed laundry in frigid water or waited in queue at the market. They claim beauty vanishes, but what they don't mention is how intensely you labour to preserve the remnants of it. How many Victorian ladies maintain quiet assemblies like yours? Small bottles, dusts, essences, all concealed from scrutiny, all murmured commitments and crystal. You recall your mother had a blue flask. Cold cream, she named it, though it smelled slightly of vinegar and rose. She never retired without spreading it over her forehead. You used to mock until you discovered yourself performing the identical action, identical gesture, years afterward. At that moment you assumed it was pride. Now you grasp it was endurance. The world doesn't stop to ease you when your complexion erupts in winter, or when the sun deposits freckles you didn't want. But that small container, that's your instant of command. You can't halt time, but you can hydrate through it. Tonight you follow the creases around your lips with your fingertip, observing, not criticizing. Then you reach for the other small vial, just a measure of castor essence intended for lashes. Someone once mentioned it encouraged them to lengthen. You're uncertain it functions, but the custom is half the purpose. Your dressing table, humble as it is, contains all your silent defiances. A chalk piece for corrections. A fragment of beeswax for your mouth. A thread of silk for shaping your brows. Not stylish now, but your aunt instructed you, and old practices remain. These aren't instruments of temptation. They're charms, protection even. Because regardless of how many layers your gown has, the initial thing the world observes is your face. You bend closer to the mirror now, the surface slightly distorted, presenting a version of you that isn't completely truthful. A bit slimmer here, a bit more generous there. You favour it this way. There's a small container hidden behind the lantern. Rouge, ground and faded. You open it with a soft exhale. The pigment is nearly depleted, consumed in the edges, where your fingertip always reaches. You dab a bit onto your face, just enough to counter the dullness. It's not for company. You're not anticipating guests. It's for you, a signal that you still mind what you appear like when nobody's observing. In Victorian times, coloured ladies were deemed improper, but that was only if the colour displayed the genuine skill was in concealment. You were supposed to appear natural but not coloured, radiant but not coated. Any proof of attempt was disgraceful. So you mastered being cunning. You combined starch with rose water, applied raw tuber juice on marks, held chamomile-soaked fabrics over your eyelids, studied magazine fragments that guaranteed French methods and natural appearances that, strangely, all demanded white lead or arsenic. One even proposed consuming tapeworms to maintain a slender shape. You didn't believe that one, but you do remember purchasing a complexion tonic once that rendered your fingertips faintly grey for a week. Still, none of that was as odd as the violet bloom powder you once created. Ground by hand, dried in sunlight, then compressed into a pendant you wore near your chest. Allegedly, it extracted impurities. You never saw a change, but it made you feel refined, and that was sufficient, because every lady on your block had her own practices. Some trusted goose grease, others employed milk immersions if they could manage it. A few massaged onions on their heads for hair thickness. You attempted that too once. The odour persisted for days, but nobody discussed it openly. You all acted as though beauty arrived naturally, like respiration or stitching even seams. It was the silent falsehood you consented to share together, that you simply happened to awaken radiant. That you weren't striving, that you weren't terrified of turning invisible. Now, as you return each container and tin to their positions, you do so with care. You know this dressing table isn't magnificent. The compartment catches. The mirror edge is damaged. The brush is absent, half its hairs. But it's yours, and every night it welcomes you with respect. Because this custom isn't about acting to be youthful, it's about recalling that you are still present. You stroke your palms over your face one final time, then extinguish the lantern. And in the blackness, the aroma of citrus, rose and ancient mysteries remains, delicate and genuine like you. You push your hands into the heated dough, moulding it carefully, sensing it yield under your palms. It's early, still too early for daybreak, but the kitchen is already moving. The iron range radiates with warmth. A pot whispers faintly on the burner, and on the surface before you, a line of baking pans waits like disciplined troops. Bread first, then soap. That's the order. Victorian ladies were quite familiar with multi-purpose kitchens, and your morning starts not with a meal but with heating lye and collecting tallow into a worn vessel. There's a procedure to it, just like with the cold cream or the fan. This one simply reeks worse and could sear your flesh off if you're not attentive. You reach for the soap form, shaped timber passed down from your mother. Mother? She carved a blossom into the edge years back, just to make the finished cakes lovelier. Even lye can be graceful, she used to claim. And so you produce soap from ash, grease, and thyme. It's not just about sanitation. It's a silent uprising against filth, sickness, and everything the outside realm attempts to carry into your dwelling. Cleanliness is not just holiness, it's protection. But your soap isn't the sole unusual thing in this kitchen. There's the vinegar pitcher, heavy and murky, employed for everything from hair treatments to glass cleaning. There's the borax container, vivid red with peeling paint, utilised to bleach laundry. and occasionally even bathe your feet when they throb. And then there's the laundry bluing, a small bottle of rich cobalt fluid that somehow renders white linens look whiter. Sorcery by science. You open the tall cabinet and retrieve a tin labelled Fuller's Earth. Most individuals think it's for laundry. You understand differently. Combined with rose water, it transforms into a facial paste, refreshing, settling, masking redness. You spread it sometimes after soap production, when the lye vapours get too aggressive and your face stings. It rests beside another container, powdered chalk. Not the school board variety, but the cosmetic variety. Mixed with citrus juice, it functions like bleach, severe but successful. You applied some on a spot once. It dimmed. After 2 weeks, the spot returned, so did you. There's an entire pharmacy concealed in this kitchen if you know where to search. One shelf for preparation, one for remedy, one for mysteries. That brown flask with the stopper. Laudanum. Intended for pains, intended for migraines, intended for sorrow you can't identify but sense expanding in your ribcage on cloudy afternoons. You don't employ it frequently. Just knowing it's available helps. And positioned behind the blossom jar, a small tin labelled Mrs. Allen's World's Hair Restorer. A magnificent title for something that reeks like moist plants and vinegar. You've applied it for months. You're uncertain it accomplishes anything, but your hair hasn't turned grey quite yet. Chance? Perhaps. Or perhaps confidence is its own form of remedy. The pot begins to hiss softly and you shift to remove it from the burner. Digits wrapped in the edge of your apron, you transfer the steaming water into a bowl, allowing it to blend with plants you crushed earlier. Lavender and thyme primarily, with a touch of mint. It's not for drinking, it's for your feet. After hours of standing, of baking, washing, sweeping, and soap production, this bowl of scented water feels like absolution. You settle, skirts gathered around your knees, and slowly immerse your aching feet into the bowl. The heat bites initially, but then penetrates upward, a calm spreading through your frame. This is the instant you anticipate most, not because it's theatrical, but because it's yours. The kitchen is shadowy now, darkness stretching far over worn tile and split wooden rafters. The flames die down. The smell of lye has dissolved into something heated and faintly pleasant. You recline back and breathe out, gazing at the ceiling where soot has twisted into phantom patterns. Forms. In this stillness, your eyes wander to the shelf above the range. A single mug rests there, damaged and marked. Your private cup, always slightly too warm to grasp, always containing something intended to comfort you. Reach for it, as you consistently do. Tonight, it's bone stock and barley, slow, boiled with a bay leaf and a dash of salt. You drink carefully. The warmth descends down your throat and into your stomach, grounding you, and you recall something. That small bottle in the rear of the compartment, the one labelled Dr. Thomas Electric Oil, a universal remedy. The marking claims you applied it last week on a scold, the week prior, on a cough. Before that, on your husband's shoulder, when it pained from splitting wood. It didn't repair any of those conditions, but you felt improved using it. And maybe that's sufficient because so many of these items, these unusual implements of Victorian womanhood, aren't truly about miracle remedies or beauty metamorphoses. They're about minor acts of command, respect in repetition, strength in routine. You may not cast ballots, you may not address Parliament, but you can blend vinegar with citrus rind and create your own metal polish. You can simmer plants and imagine their enchantments. You can immerse your feet at the conclusion of a day and name it remedy. And in a reality where everything is demanded of you, grace, cleanliness, commitment, beauty, these little items let you recover something. Not for the reality, not even for your household, but for you. The bowl water has chilled, your drink is finished. You stand, pat your feet dry and arrange everything in its position. There is structure here, even if nobody else witnesses it, even if they label it peculiar. And now the dwelling is quiet. The flames have died out. The bowl is drained, the tin of rouge is sealed, and the entrance to the kitchen has been secured with its familiar gentle click. You lie back in the calm of your chamber, your body enclosed in warmth, your thoughts full of the minor, peculiar things that formed your day. Not magnificent inventions or sovereign proclamations, just containers, brushes, soaps, fans, and powders. Just silent implements for survival, for grace, for self-regard. Each item told a narrative, and every narrative was yours. You remember the way the starch crinkled in your undergarment, the way cold cream dissolved beneath your digits, the way a whalebone brush pulled just a bit too firmly at your head. The fragrance of violet blooms, the bite of vinegar, the silence of linen drying near the fireplace. These, the recollections that don't require words, because they exist in your senses, in your flesh. You accomplished so much today, and yet most of it will remain unnoticed. That's acceptable. The wonder was never in being witnessed. It was in performing so. Rest now. Let the resonances of the day settle into quietness, the sort of quietness that feels deserved. Outside, a wind shakes the blinds. The night suspends its breath, and you, steady, capable, and quietly commanding, slip into slumber wrapped not in lace, but in the texture of 1,000 ordinary victories.